This is Michael Luchies, Communications Manager for the After School app, the largest teen-focused social network for teens, and I'm here with Crisis Text Line's Chief Data Scientist, Bob Filbin. Data plays a large role in the efforts of both After School and Crisis Text Line, and I'm excited to discuss how data can be used to save lives with Bob Filbin today. Bob, thanks for joining me. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So let's jump right into it. Now, After School's target market is teens. We provide teens with an anonymous place they can share and connect with other students at their school. Crisis Text Line does work with a lot of teens, but it's available for anyone. For those who aren't familiar with Crisis Text Line, how would you describe it?
So Crisis Text Line is the first national service for people in crisis via text. And so we initially launched just focused on young people. We still primarily serve people under the age of 25. About 75% of our texters are in that age range. But we have the 25% over that age. So we help a wide range of people and cover a wide range of crises. So 35% of conversations are depression and suicidal ideation, anxiety, self-harm are other major issues. But any issue that somebody perceives as a crisis, we're here to help.
So what have you learned about the people that call out for help through your free text line? I mean, you mentioned some of the problems that they handle. What other things have you learned through this?
Well, I think one of the things that strikes me is that we're reaching a population that other services are not reaching. Around 2/3 of our texters say they're mentioning something in a conversation with our crisis counselors that they've never shared with anybody else. So in a lot of ways, this is a gateway, a first time that people are using a service that's related to mental health or crisis, and people are sharing things for the first time. Another big thing for me is that we're reaching some vulnerable populations. So a few examples of that. One, we looked at the 10% of zip codes that have the lowest income nationally, the lowest 10%. 19% of our texters come from those zip codes. Around 5% of our texters are identify as American Indian, whereas nationally only around 1.5% of people identify as American Indian. So we're reaching people that, one, tend to over-index for mental health issues. Like if you look at American Indian youth in particular, they're over 100 times as likely to die by suicide than the national population on average. And so we're reaching these populations that are particularly vulnerable, and they have less access to care on the ground in other forms. So that's one of the things that really stands out about this service, is that it's national, it's 24/7, available anywhere in the country, and you don't have to download something or go to a certain place. It's just on your phone. It's via SMS, so it's super simple to access.
So how does Crisis Text Line use data to save lives?
Yeah, so we use data in a lot of ways. Actually, the organization is really built from the ground up around data. So you were talking about how data is so critical to organizations. It's so nice if you can set it up from the very beginning, because that really, I think a lot of data organizations are burdened by collection and storage, figuring out these big problems around how you just collect all the data. And we set that up from the very beginning. So what we have is, rather than putting a lot of our effort and energy into collecting and storing data, we're able to put all of our energy into analysis. We, from the very beginning, set up a database, figured out what variables we want to store, and so that's just running automatically. And you can think of the conversations that we have are just naturally producing data as a result of the conversation. So what the issues were that came up, time of day, location, these things just kind of occur naturally and allow us to focus all of our efforts on identifying insights in the data. The two ways that we're using that: one, we use data internally to improve the quality of our service, and then two, we share data externally with the crisis space, with journalists, and academics to inform how the country and how all these policymakers, et cetera, think about mental health as a challenge to work on and something to put resources against. There really isn't good data out there nationally. One of the best data sets other than ours is something put out by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, and they do an annual survey. But it looks historically over the last year, asking people how they identify crisis, and it's only this one snapshot over the year. Our data is coming in daily, every second, and so we see how crises vary over time and how somebody thinks about crisis in that very moment that they're experiencing it. So it's giving a very unique look that's allowing for much smarter, I think, care and interventions to support people in crisis.
Yeah, and speaking on behalf of After School, we've just been floored with the data that we've gotten through our partnership with Crisis Text Line, being able to see what our users struggle with, and then being able to provide them resources along those different topics that they're really struggling with.
Yeah, like a very wide range of issues for people coming in through after school, and some really severe issues too. It's I think when we launched, I was thinking bullying is going to be a major issue, or LGBTQ, and so coming out as gay, things like that would be major issues. And we do see those around 3 to 4% of our conversations, but we also see a lot of self-harm, like 1 in 5 texters are actually experiencing self-harm, more than that for suicidal ideation. And so the severity of it really surprised me.
So what's your role as the chief data scientist? What's your role with the data?
Yeah, so we have those two channels. We have the data that we use and analyze to improve our service internally, and then the data that we share out externally. So I'll speak to just one project that I really love that we have worked on. We have this texter triage tool. So the idea is that most crisis services react to supporting texters in terms of when those texters reach out. So time-based support. If you text in first, you get help first. We, however, act more like a hospital, so like a triage system where it's not only when you come in, but it's the severity. So hospital will help somebody with a bullet wound before they help somebody with a broken leg, and we work the same way. So we used to have a list of just 50 words that we knew were related to high risk, like die, kill, suicide, things like that, and we would use that to triage texters. Recently, we built an algorithm on top of our data that looks at conversations that ended up being high risk. So we ended up sending out emergency services to intervene in an active suicide attempt. And by looking at the content of those conversations, we can see the words that texters used that led to this high-risk conversation. And so we're able to see, actually, in the first that the texter sends, is this conversation going to be high risk with a reasonably high degree of accuracy? And we move these texters to being number one in the queue. And these high-severity texters we find are 6 times, the ones that we're flagging here are 6 times likely to end up in an active rescue, so it's where we send out emergency services. So it's working really well in terms of accuracy. And for that group, we've driven down the wait times in the queue to 39 seconds. So incredibly fast response time for our high severity texters. So this is like, I think really the promise of data is this idea of can you actually turn data into providing a better service for your most vulnerable populations, your highest risk populations. It's not just serving ads, which, is another application of data science. It's actually changing and saving lives.
And so besides using it to help with managing the queue, how does it help with the trained volunteer crisis counselors that interact with the people that are texting you for help?
Yeah, this is a huge application of our data. Our counselors are volunteers, like you said, and they go through 35 hours worth of training online. So we built out this online training, and we can actually see in the data of the conversations that occur what works. So we know what our training is, and then we know how our counselors implement that training. We can see words and patterns in what they use that actually leads to higher satisfaction, higher helpfulness in conversations for our texters. So one pattern that I saw is there's a concept that we talk about in crisis counseling called strength IDs. So this is where you're identifying something strong in the texter that they did, even though they feel like maybe a lot of their life is out of control, or they don't feel strong in a lot of ways. But it turns out when you use strength IDs, that can lead to empowering the texter to make decisions that continue to strengthen them over time. And the words brave, smart, and proud are three words that we found, three strength IDs that help a texter more than any other strength IDs that we use and almost any other word. So when those words are embedded in a conversation, it tends to lead to more helpful conversations for the texter. And so we've actually, like both, I think, in our office and then in our personal lives, are using these words more with friends and family members. And anecdotally, I'm seeing the benefit to those words as well. They're just really powerful words. If you say some of these words, that was so brave that you did that. These types of insights, we then loop back into our training. And so we're it's not just training based on academic research or that was developed in some other context that's similar. This is our exact service, insights from that, and then we're directly looping it back into the training. So there's a very tight cycle of learning and then implementation that we have the luxury to have because we both collect the data and then we implement the findings.
Once again, this is Michael Luchies from After School App, and I'm here with Crisis Text Line Chief Data Scientist Bob Filbin. Now, when most people look at social networks, they see it as a form of entertainment, and it's often questioned due to greater connecting us with people that can make it easier to potentially bully or harm someone online. Do you think that there's more good than bad that will come out of the future of social networks, and why or why not?
Yeah, that's a big question. So I would say they're here, and that's not going to change. And so thinking about whether it's good or bad is actually missing the point. I think the point is that they're here. Like we could debate and have a philosophical armchair kind of conversation about the benefit, but I think they're there, and so we need to accept that and react to it. That's the reality. That's where conversations are happening. Where young people are gravitating, and that services need to meet people where they are. So if people are on social networks and they find value in that, then support systems need to be created around that. And so I think that was one of the critical design choices that we made with Crisis Text Line, was always to be exactly where people in crisis are. And that means SMS, it means Facebook Messenger, and then other messaging services as they come up. So we started with SMS, but we're flexible, and we're going to continue to build and move towards where young people are talking. And so I think in that sense that the social networks, it's not good or bad, it just exists, and the goal is to continue to support people where they gravitate.
And we both provide anonymous services. How do you think data changes when you take the option of anonymity off of the table? What would Crisis Text Line, what they provide, would it be possible if users had to reveal their names when trying to chat with somebody from Crisis Text Line?
I think anonymity is something that I think people understand differently. There's informational anonymity, and then there's emotional anonymity. I would actually say the latter is more important for use of our service. The former, the informational, is what you hear about in the news and tends to be a major point of concern for journalists, et cetera, and policymakers talking about the issue. Talking to our users, it's entirely the emotional anonymity. That's why people prefer to reach out to Crisis Text Line. I've talked to texters who've said that they don't want the person on the other end to hear them crying, or they don't feel comfortable talking to somebody that they know because they want to talk to you in some sense a stranger, somebody that isn't a part of their daily life, and so they have that a little bit of emotional distance that feels like a safety net in some sense. And so I think that emotional anonymity is something that is very powerful about text, and probably why why texting is popular in general as a medium, but also why people would prefer to reach out to our service than, say, a phone line. You just have that extra layer of safety, of the flexibility in how and when you respond that you wouldn't have if you were on the phone. And so one of the results of that is we actually have a lot of texters who will text us from school, who, like last week we had a conversation from somebody who was in biology class at the time. We had many conversations with students who were, in the lunchroom or in the bathroom in the stall at the time, and are crying or something is going wrong, and so they're in a place of relative safety for them, but they're in their daily lives. They're like in the moment of crisis, and they can reach out to us from anywhere. And I think that is only possible because of the emotional safety and flexibility of a program like texting versus if you had to be on the phone.
Now, with helping people in a sensitive state, how can you balance data-driven decisions and decisions made for the best interest of an individual person?
So I think data-driven decisions and decisions made for the best interest of an individual are often aligned. They are, in many cases, like the triage example. The triage tool that I talked about is only possible because of data at scale. So you have the volume, the velocity, and the variety of data to provide insights about what people in crisis say. Like the word ibuprofen is 16 times as likely to occur in a conversation that ends up being an act of rescue where we send out emergency services as not. The word suicide, it turns out, is not indicative of that act of rescue at all. It could be a low risk or high risk conversation, equally likely. Those insights are only possible through data at scale, and yet the end result is they go back and they help the individual person. So the high risk texter gets moved up to the top of the queue and gets helped first, rather than a texter who tends to be lower risk. They're talking about a relationship issue, for example. So I would say that actually the critical piece is you need that underlying layer of focus on fighting for the user, and that includes security, that includes privacy, that includes making sure that the data you're producing is driving value back to the user. And if those philosophical principles are in place, and then the resulting products and policies that come from that, then I think that actually data-driven decision-making and decision-making for individuals is aligned. So as long as you have the right underpinning philosophy for how you're using data and protecting data, then data is only an agent for good for the group and for the individual texters that come into our system.
Now, I would imagine your job is extremely rewarding, but is it also extremely stressful? I mean, how does the role that Crisis Text Line play in saving lives impact your job? Does it put more pressure on you and make you question your decisions more than you would in a normal, 9-to-5 for-profit company?
And yeah, it's intense issues. Do I face that? Every day I think we recognize how, and I recognize just how critical. That's part of why I started with Crisis Text Line. I was actually the first employee, and me and one other guy, an engineer, were sitting in a room and just working on the basic data and coding structure of Crisis Text Line from the very beginning. And I think the two of us started from the very beginning when there was like a blank slate in terms of what the organization and data and everything would be, because we were so invested in the issue and felt like this is something really important that a data scientist and an engineer could work on versus, me working on serving ads at another company. And so I think that's something that really motivates me on a daily basis to be a data scientist and have all this potential real world impact for the space. And I think like hopefully it's a sign or a symbol for other not-for-profits or organizations that are thinking about this kind of social impact that it's possible to have this kind of impact. I think data science is something that's been rare in the not-for-profit space. Foundations really haven't funded it to a great degree, but they're starting to. They're funding my position, so I feel very thankful for that. And so I think as we see more and more successes in the space, taking on these intense issues, that we're hopefully paving the way for more of this type of thinking around data and technology to scale social solutions in a space that's really been focused on like small scale, really niche solutions that really haven't been able to scale and solve some of the big problems that we're seeing today. And so I'm hopeful that that we're going to see more thought of data and technology in the interest of scaling and trying to address these concerns at scale.
Just a few questions. Have you come across any extremely shocking data, things that you could never have predicted? And if so, what's been the most interesting piece of data you've come across?
Shocking data, I think, like all the time. I mean, there's so much stuff, and I would say one of the greatest limitations is just how many staff we have. So one of the things I'm most excited about, we're opening up some of our data now through an ethics review process and very like stringent protocol, but to certain academic research partners so we can scale some of the research that we're doing. And they're taking on all kinds of fascinating issues. So I'll say like one thing that I found in the data that was really fascinating to me is that 47% of our texters do not identify as straight or heterosexual. So we have this huge contingent of our population that is across the spectrum of sexual orientation, like bisexual, gay, lesbian, pansexual, asexual, et cetera. And I think that's something that's really worth exploring. And so one academic research group that's going to be accessing our data is looking at how local policy around LGBTQ issues and then histories of hate crimes or bullying around LGBTQ relates to the conversations that we're seeing. So is there a relationship there? If you have policies that are more friendly or less friendly, does that change the tenor of the conversations or the volume of conversations around LGBTQ issues at the local level? So I think what we're seeing now is there's some initial insights that are really surprising to me, but then there's I don't have expertise in LGBTQ issues in particular. So our goal is to find these nuggets, these insights, and then partner with experts in the space. We have the data, they have the expertise, and can we combine that to find some really exciting insights that will drive better policy?
Now, I don't want to dive too much into politics, but did you guys anticipate the large spike you recently had in activity due to the election results?
I thought like it's an anxious time, and so I expected, and I think on staff we were like, well, maybe we'll see an increase in volume, but we had no idea. We did not predict the amount of increase that we saw. We saw at sometimes right after the election about an 8x increase in volume versus our normal. Over the next few days, how about on average a 4 increase in volume? And well, one of the key things we saw a big increase in LGBTQ texters specifically, and the number one word that was being used by this group and generally across those few days after the election was scared. And there was just that was the overarching sense. We also heard from a lot of texters who were Muslim, who were either concerned about their family or themselves in terms of the results of the election, how that might impact them. So there was a very real world impact, and I think a lot of crisis lines saw a similar increase in volume.
In the future, so you mentioned that text is just one avenue now. What future impact do you think that the data you're collecting can have?
Yeah, so I mentioned the enclave data. There's also we have a website, crisistrends.org. If you go there, that's available to the public. When I said enclave data, I mean that's the data we share with our academic research partners. Crisistrends.org is our public data, and you can see trends. Those are updated daily, and we will be creating a version 2 that we're actually going to be rolling out shortly on December 14th. So that's forthcoming. And so I think this is all designed towards impacting journalism, impacting policy, and then impacting academic research. The great thing about this service is by partnering with after school, we have and other organizations, we have all this data that's flowing into one place, and so we get a very holistic view of how crises are occurring. And so the patterns that we can see are really quite nuanced. We can see, for example, what's the difference between what's happening in the school year versus the summer, or weekdays versus weekends, or what happens on holidays. For example, volume on holidays I thought would increase. Turns out it drops by about 20%, but the issues change. So you see a lot more family-related issues, unsurprisingly, but the severity also increases, even though it's less hexers overall. For the ones who do, the severity increases. So those types of insights and nuance, I think, are possible because of all these partnerships. And so I think as we continue to scale and get more volume in, we'll be able to push out even more and more nuanced insights from the data, both on that public crisistrends.org and then through our academic partnerships.
Great. And how can anyone listening find out more about Crisis Text Line?
So we have our website. We also have, so that I'll just say the number just in case anybody knows somebody this might be useful for. It's 741-741. So if you text into that number, you'll be connected to one of our crisis counselors.
Great. Bob, thanks again. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
Hey, take care.